Hi, Mystery Recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a fantasy movie called The Bothersome Man. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens with a middle-aged man named Andreas at an underground train station. He notices a couple in the distance who are kissing and making strange noises. The kiss doesn't seem romantic. Rather, it's very weird and forceful. After observing them for a while, Andreas decides that he can't take this miserable life any longer and jumps onto the train tracks. In the following scene, we see an abandoned gas station in the middle of the desert where an old man is hanging a welcome sign. Moments later, a bus arrives there with Andreas as the only passenger. He is unexpectedly alive and has no idea how he ended up here. The bus drops him off at the gas station where the old man greets him, saying he had been waiting for him. He then takes down the welcome sign and offers to escort Andreas to his new home. The latter is still perplexed, but he enters the car and they drive away. Afterward, they arrive at a modern city that looks peaceful, but at the same time is very lifeless. The old man leaves Andreas at his apartment and gives him the keys. He also tells him about his new job as an accountant, saying that it's a very good firm. Andreas then heads to his place, which is furnished and has a few clothes for him. Looking in the mirror, he is surprised by his rough appearance and decides to shave. The next morning, Andreas wears a suit and heads to his first day at the job. There, he is greeted by his boss, who introduces him to some of his coworkers. The office atmosphere is positive and everyone appears to be very friendly. His boss then takes him to his office and even pays him a portion of his salary in advance. Despite this, Andreas feels very empty and unenthusiastic for some reason. He is not very clear about his job, so he starts transcribing some documents on his computer to kill time. In the afternoon, Andreas goes outside for his lunch break. He sits on a bench near his office and proceeds to eat. After finishing his meal, he returns to his office, but witnesses something disturbing along the way. A man has jumped from a building and gotten caught in an iron fence. His internal organs are scattered across the ground, creating a terrifying sight. However, the people around him don't seem too bothered. As if it's a normal thing, the cleaners are also attempting to remove his body without too much concern. Andreas can't bear this sight any longer and heads to his office. When he looks out his window, he sees that the body has already been removed and the area has been cleaned, as if nothing happened. Later that night, Andreas heads to a bar to get drunk, but even after drinking a lot, he doesn't feel the effects of alcohol. He then heads to the bathroom and begins complaining, asserting that the alcohol here seems to be mixed with water. The man in front of him says it's probably not true. Just then, another man named Hugo speaks up from inside the bathroom stall. He agrees with Andreas and says that everything here tastes bland, including the food and the warmth of women. Afterward, Andreas follows Hugo out of the bar and ends up in front of a basement. He hears beautiful music coming from inside, but doesn't dare to approach the source and leaves. The next day, Andreas is cutting paper at his office when he suddenly becomes curious and deliberately chops off his finger. He begins to scream in pain, which attracts the attention of his colleagues, but surprisingly, they don't appear concerned and simply inquire why he's sitting on the floor. Andreas asks them not to touch him, but he soon loses consciousness due to blood loss. When he awakens, he finds himself in the back of a car with his hand bandaged, accompanied by city cleaners. They proceed to drive him home, and during the journey, they don't utter a single word. When they finally arrive at his place, Andreas thanks them, but the cleaners don't respond and drive away. Later, Andreas goes to the bathroom and removes the bandage from his hand. To his shock, he discovers that his chopped finger has fully grown back without any scar or mark. These strange events frighten him so much that he fails to fall asleep that night. The next morning, Andreas returns to the gas station where the old man is putting up another welcome sign. A bus soon arrives, and a man gets off to be greeted by the old man. When it turns to leave, Andreas decides to follow it to see where it goes, but the bus suddenly disappears seconds later, leaving him more confused than ever. In the next scene, Andreas returns to his office where his boss is waiting for him. The boss asks if he's adjusting well to the office environment and if he needs any new chairs or computers. Andreas assures him that he's fine, and the boss says that he can take as long a lunch break as he wants. Andreas then goes to the office cafeteria and eats lunch with his coworkers for the first time. He gets along well with them, and one even invites him to a dinner party later. In the evening, he arrives at the party and manages to bond with the other guests. He also meets with with an attractive woman named Anne, who is an interior designer. Andreas strikes up a conversation with her, asking if she wants to go out sometime. She instantly agrees, almost as if she was waiting for it. Andreas then takes her home after the party, where they end up making love. Following this night, our protagonist's life improves, and he begins to feel happier. He keeps a plant in his office and purchases a luxury car. His relationship with Anne also grows closer day by day, and he helps her renovate her new home. Once the renovations are complete, the two make the big decision to move in together. However, after some time passes, Andreas begins to grow bored of this routine as well. Problems start to arise in his relationship with Anne. He realizes that he doesn't feel anything for her, and even when they make love, it lacks passion. One night, when he's unable to sleep, he gets out of bed and decides to drink coffee, but it has no taste, as usual. Moments later, Anne finds him and asks what he's doing in the middle of the night. He starts to tell her about a nightmare he had, but she abruptly cuts him off, saying she's not interested in the story. Days later, Andreas starts to feel interested in one of his coworkers named Ingeborg. She is warm and has a cheerful personality, unlike his cold girlfriend. One day, he takes the initiative to ask her out on a date, and surprisingly, she also agrees. This makes Andreas very happy, and he immediately calls Anne to inform her that he will be home late tonight. In the evening, the two go to see a movie, which turns out to be quite sad. Andreas begins to cry, but Ingeborg remains unaffected and just rests her head on his shoulder. When he drops her off at home, he asks if she feels bad that he lives with another woman. Ingeborg responds that she doesn't mind, and the two begin making out at her doorstep. What did I just do? In the following days, the two begin dating secretly, and he seems to be head over heels for her. Andreas eventually gets tired of living with Anne and decides to be with the love of his life. One evening, he approaches Anne and asks her to end their relationship. He admits that he has fallen in love with someone else at work. Surprisingly, Anne doesn't mind and asks him to leave after Sunday because they will be hosting guests that evening. Following this, Andreas hurries to Ingeborg's home in the middle of the night with flowers. He then takes her out and surprises her with dinner at a fancy restaurant. While eating, he announces that he has broken up with Anne and suggests that they can now live together. However, Ingeborg doesn't seem too thrilled and says he shouldn't have done that. She didn't think their relationship was serious, and also reveals that she has been seeing multiple men at the same time. Upon hearing this, Andreas is clearly devastated, but he pretends to be fine. He says he doesn't mind because he was also cheating on his girlfriend. He then asks Ingeborg to stop seeing other men from now on. She's a bit hesitant at first, but eventually agrees. Not because she loves him though, but because her apartment's too small, and she needs a larger space. This disappoints him so much that he leaves the restaurant without finishing his meal. Following this, Andreas heads to the train station, where he notices two couples kissing strangely. This is the same scene and location that we saw at the beginning of the movie. Exhausted with his life, he jumps onto the train tracks to unalive himself. But then, something strange happens. Even though several trains pass through him, he doesn't die. Despite his body being crushed and his bones being broken, he miraculously recovers again. After several hours, Andreas gets up and follows the light at the end of the tunnel. He limps and arrives back in the city, where the cleaners find him. They put him in their car and drive him to his home. When Anne sees him, she is not surprised or concerned about his condition, and instead asks if he's available to go go-karting this weekend. With no other option, he accepts her invitation and surrenders himself to this empty life. One evening, Andreas is returning home when he stumbles upon Hugo's basement again and hears the music. Intrigued, he knocks on the door and requests to have a conversation. Hugo is initially scared to let him in, but after some convincing, he eventually does. Andreas notices that the basement is filled with lights and a painting covering a small hole from which the music streams. He peeks through and notices a moon on the other side, which excites him greatly. The next day at work, Andreas continues to think about what he saw the previous night. His boss notices that he seems a little distracted and asks what's on his mind. Andreas reveals that he misses the taste of hot chocolate and the sound of children playing around. He wonders why this place doesn't have any children, only adults and elderly people. Hearing this, his boss is a bit surprised, but doesn't say anything and leaves. In the evening, Andreas returns to the basement and begins digging the tunnel with an electric drill. Hugo scolds him for attracting attention and demands that he leave. But just then, an exquisite smell of something delicious emerges from the hole. This excites Hugo as well, and he begins to help Andreas dig the tunnel. The next day, Andreas returns to his workplace and discovers that he has been replaced by someone who looks like him. He questions questions why he was fired, but his boss explains that this is an opportunity for him to find another great job that inspires him. At this point, Andreas doesn't seem to care much and returns to Hugo's place to work on the tunnel. Together, they create a large hole from which music and pleasant smells emanate. Other people in the neighborhood also notice this and knock on the door. They beg to see what they are working on and promise not to report it. However, the two men send them away, claiming that they are simply fixing a leak. Shortly after, Andreas begins to crawl through the tunnel and almost reaches the opposite end. There, he sees a real world with a colorful house and hears children playing in the background. His arm stretches into the house, where he manages to steal some cake sitting on the kitchen counter. Just then, the cleaners arrive and pull him back by the leg, but Andreas still has the cake, which he devours in a flash. He realizes that it's the most delicious thing he has ever tasted. Following this, the two men are immediately captured by the cleaners. They are then forced into a car and sent to confront the city officials. Hugo is soon released, as he doesn't pose much of a threat to them. However, Andreas keeps his stance and doesn't beg for mercy. While Andreas is sitting in the car, an official arrives and informs him that everyone in this city is happy and wants to keep it that way. She says that they are proud of what they have accomplished and asks Andreas to stop causing trouble. However, he just sits there, speechless, and it is clear that he's not going to yield to them. After some discussion, the city leaders decide to send Andreas to another place. He is taken to the gas station again, where the old guy picks him up. He is then forcibly locked in the trunk and driven away from there. Andreas bumps and struggles for a while, after which he soon loses consciousness. Meanwhile, at Hugo's place, the cleaners are seen closing the hole in the wall. Back in the town, we see that both Anne and Ingeborg have found new boyfriends and are living happily. Meanwhile, Andreas finally arrives at his destination. As he kicks open the trunk door and steps out, he is shocked to find himself in a frozen wasteland with no signs of civilization. The bus then departs, leaving him stranded and alone to suffer forever in this desolate wilderness. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.